So I want you to picture a motorcycle rider from behind.
Okay.
They're sitting on their bike. Maybe they're just filling up at a gas station just off the highway. And they are wearing this heavy black leather vest.
Right.
But, it is not just any vest. Across the top shoulders, spanning the entire width of the back, there is this large, curved white and red patch. In the biker world, they call that a rocker.
Right, the top rocker.
Yeah, and this one reads, Hell's Angels.
Yeah.
In that unmistakable, very rigid lettering. And then down at the bottom, curving the opposite way, is another rocker that simply says Quebec.
Gotcha.
Off to the side, there's a small square patch with the letters MC. But the focal point, like the absolute center of gravity for this entire piece of clothing, sits right in the middle of the back.
The death head.
Exactly, it says the death head. A skull shown in stark profile wearing this really elaborately detailed winged helmet. And it's all riveted in this heavy red, gold, and black thread.
It is, it's an incredibly potent, just visually aggressive piece of branding. And I think we really do have to look at it as branding. It is highly recognizable worldwide. And when you see it in person, it carries an enormous amount of historical weight, mythos, and quite frankly, implied danger.
It really does. It completely shifts the atmosphere of wherever it happens to be. And the mission of our deep dive today is to explore this sweeping, really unprecedented new legal reality regarding that exact image.
Yeah, it's a massive shift.
Because as of late August 2026 in the province of Quebec, wearing that specific jacket in public is now a punishable offense. And we aren't just talking about, a municipal dress code or a private business refusing service.
Right, like a no shoes, no shirt kind of.
Exactly. No. We're looking at a fundamental shift in how the state interacts with visual symbols.
Yeah, we are looking at the outright criminalization of a specific visual identity in the public sphere. The government is essentially drawing a line in the sand regarding exactly what kind of imagery is allowed to occupy public space.
Right. And to guide us through this maze, because it is a maze, we have a really fascinating stack of sources. We're drawing on recent news reports from August 21st, 2026, alongside the actual literal legislative text of Quebec's Bill 13.
The source code, basically.
Yeah, the source code. And, of course, the photographic evidence of the targeted symbols themselves, like the jacket we just described. So, okay, let's unpack this. Because this isn't just about biker fashion or aesthetics.
No, not at all.
This is about a fascinating intersection of law, public safety, civil liberties, and the weaponization of symbolism.
It really is a fascinating collision of all those concepts. And to understand how we arrived at this moment, I think we have to look at the legal mechanism that just transformed that leather vest from, a piece of clothing into literal contraband.
Right.
Because this didn't happen overnight. It is the result of a very specific, deliberately constructed governmental decree that was entirely designed to target this exact type of public display.
Right, because the overarching law was passed a few months prior, back in the spring, but the actual hammer just dropped, like the target was finally painted.
Precisely. So back in April 2026, the Quebec government passed Bill 13. And the formal, rather sweeping title of this legislation is an act to promote peace, order, and public security in Quebec.
Right.
Now, that bill created the legal framework, the scaffolding, if you will. But a framework doesn't do anything until it's activated. It required a specific administrative action to be enforced against anyone.
And that just happened.
Exactly. Ian Lafreniere, who is Quebec's Minister of Public Security, he signed a decree officially naming the Hells Angels as the very first criminal group targeted by this new legislation.
And the teeth of this legislation, like the actual mechanism of enforcement, is found in Section 6 of the bill, which explicitly prohibits exposing objects to public view that identify any entity placed on this newly created list.
Yeah, and they cast a very wide net here.
They really do. It includes emblems, insignias, acronyms, or, frankly, anything that could even be mistaken for their official symbols.
Right.
It's almost like the government is treating a gang's jacket like a walking, breathing billboard for an illegal enterprise.
That's a great way to put it.
And they are aggressively shutting down their marketing department. If you think about how major corporations fiercely protect their trademarks to project a very specific image of, say, reliability or luxury, the government is essentially stepping in here and saying, we are revoking your right to advertise your power.
Yeah, and what's fascinating here is that the ban goes significantly beyond just that main death head logo you described at the beginning.
Wait, really? So it's not just the patch on the back?
No. If we are talking about shutting down a marketing department, the legislation targets the entire merchandise line down to the subtle lifestyle branding.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the law specifically targets aliases, secondary branding, and the kind of ciphered logos that groups use to bypass traditional trademark scrutiny.
Right, because we aren't just talking about the fully patched members riding their bikes. We're talking about the auxiliary gear, the Support 81 clothing.
Exactly.
The news sources highlight that these groups have highly sophisticated merchandising operations. Like, they show up at massive public events, especially summer festivals in Quebec, with literal trucks to sell clothing featuring logos that say Support 81.
Right, and for those who might not know, the 81 is a well-known cipher within law enforcement and biker culture. It represents the initials of the club, right? H is the 8th letter of the alphabet, A is the first.
Yeah, each A.
Exactly. It's a way of broadcasting allegiance without spelling it out. And the legislation is designed to target not just the overt intimidation factor of the three-piece patch, but the attractiveness and the normalization that the entity might try to project through that secondary merchandise.
Right, because when you were selling T-shirts and hats out of a truck at a summer festival, surrounded by food vendors and live music, it normalizes the group to the general public.
It does. It makes them seem like just another edgy lifestyle brand to the casual observer.
Yeah.
And the law is trying to violently sever that public normalization. Maxime Tardif, who is a spokesperson for the minister's office, he made it abundantly clear in interviews that the state believes it is fundamentally absurd for the public in Quebec to be familiar with, comfortable with, and even financially supportive of the logos of a criminal group.
Which brings us to the absolute core of the issue. Since the government is treating these symbols as a form of illicit marketing and actively attempting to sever that normalization,
Right.
we have to ask, what exactly are these symbols selling, and why is the state stepping in so aggressively right now?
Right. What is the threshold for a logo becoming illegal?
Exactly.
Well, the why is codified directly into the law, and it attempts to remove as much ambiguity as possible. Bill 13 outlines the very specific criteria an entity has to meet to be placed on this list by the minister.
So it's not just random.
No, it is not an arbitrary decision made behind closed doors just because a politician doesn't like a certain aesthetic. The government has to prove a specific convergence of presence, intent, and visual display.
I think this is where the legal rubber meets the road, because it reveals how the state defines a criminal enterprise versus, just a group of people who just like motorcycles. It's a three-pronged test, essentially.
Right.
First, the group has to be physically active within the territory of Quebec. Second, law enforcement must establish reasonable grounds that the group actually pursues a criminal purpose, meaning they exist, at least in part, to commit, facilitate, or promote criminal offenses.
Yeah, that's key.
And third, they have to actively use or expose identifying symbols to the public.
That three-prong test is crucial. You have to be physically present, you have to have a demonstrable criminal track record or purpose, and you have to be wearing the uniform. The legislation explicitly states that the purpose of creating this list and banning these symbols is to fight against the sense of insecurity that these entities intentionally engender in the public sphere.
That specific phrase, sense of insecurity, that really jumps out at me. It's such a psychological metric for a legal document.
It really is.
But there's a striking quote from Maxime Tardif in the news reports that perfectly illustrates what the government believes that insecurity looks like in actual practice. He said, when three Hells Angels walk into a restaurant wearing their jackets, it's not usually just to go eat. This is well documented by the police in Quebec. It is to intimidate people and often to collect money.
It's a very vivid scenario that grounds the abstract legal text in a really visceral reality.
So what does this all mean for the average person? I think about that restaurant scenario. You're sitting there having dinner with your family, the door opens. Three people walk in wearing those black leather vests with the death head and the Quebec rocker.
And everything just stops.
Right, they don't have to draw a weapon. They don't have to shout. They don't have to walk up to anyone's table and say a single threatening word. Just by walking into the room wearing that specific piece of clothing, they have completely altered the atmospheric pressure of the space.
Yeah, the temperature of the room drops.
Exactly. The government is essentially arguing that this logo has been actively weaponized. It acts as a highly efficient, silent threat.
It's the concept of borrowed equity in intimidation. Like, the person wearing the jacket doesn't have to prove they're dangerous, The logo does all the heavy lifting for them based on decades of accumulated history.
Oh, that's a good way to look at it.
And that silent threat fundamentally disrupts what the legislation calls the peaceful enjoyment of premises and property in the public sphere. The state is making a profound philosophical argument here. They're saying that the public has a fundamental right to not feel psychologically intimidated while eating in a restaurant or walking down a public street, and that the logo itself is the primary instrument of that intimidation.
But understanding the psychology of why the government wants to ban the logo leads us directly into the incredibly messy, volatile reality of how they actually intend to enforce a dress code on the street.
Oh yeah, the logistics of this are wild.
Because debating the philosophy of a silent threat in a legislative chamber is one thing, right? Pulling someone over on a dark highway and telling them to surrender their jacket is a completely different reality.
It is a massive escalation of police interaction, and it requires a very specific set of enforcement tools. Furthermore, the financial penalties for ignoring it are aggressively steep.
Yeah, according to Tardif, anyone violating this new law could be fined in the thousands of dollars.
Thousands.
But I really want to look at the actual mechanics of a traffic stop, because the sources detail exactly how this is expected to play out on the pavement. Let's say the police pull over a moving vehicle, like a motorcycle, and the rider is wearing the jacket.
Okay, so the protocol dictates a graduated response. Step 1 is a direct verbal command. The police will inform the individual that they are no longer legally allowed to wear that specific imagery in public, and they'll ask them to remove the jacket.
And if they refuse, which, let's be honest, is a highly probable scenario given the culture we are talking about.
Oh, absolutely. If they refuse the verbal command, the officer escalates to issuing a formal citation. So a heavy financial ticket on the spot.
Okay, but let's take it a step further. What if the rider takes the ticket, puts it in their saddlebag, and still flat out refuses to take off the vest?
That is exactly where this new legal authority really shows its teeth. If the individual continues to refuse after the citation, the police have been granted the explicit legal authority to seize the items right then and there.
Like physically take it?
Yes, they can physically confiscate the clothing off the person's back. They also have the authority to extensively photograph the individual, the clothing, and the context for evidence. Now, Tardif noted that while the law provides these heavy-handed tools, exactly how the ban is enforced in a tense standoff on the ground is ultimately up to the discretion of the police in that specific moment.
Which is where I have to push back hard on this.
Yeah.
I understand the goal of reducing intimidation, but whenever you hand the state the power to ban visual symbols and physically confiscate clothing on the side of the road, you are wading into incredibly deep, murky waters regarding free expression.
Oh, for sure.
What about context? Let's say someone is filming a sprawling documentary about the history of biker culture in Quebec, and they have actors wearing meticulously crafted replica jackets. Or, what if a local theater is putting on a gritty crime drama that features a character in that gang? Can a police officer just walk onto a film set or outside a theater during a smoke break and confiscate a costume because it features the death head? Relying on a beat cop to make a split-second evaluation of artistic intent seems like a recipe for disaster.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, the drafters of Bill 13 actually anticipated this exact friction. They knew that a blanket zero-tolerance ban would instantly be struck down by the courts, so they built a safety valve into the legislation. Section 7 of the bill outlines strict, explicit exceptions to the ban, specifically designed to protect civil liberties in non-criminal contexts.
I'm assuming those carve-outs have to cover things like the evening news broadcasting a story about this very law. Otherwise, the anchor showing a photo of the jacket would technically be committing a crime?
Precisely. The bedrock phrase in Section 7 is that the exposure must be done in good faith and in a reasonable manner.
Okay.
If an identifying object is exposed to public view under those conditions, it is completely exempt. The law outlines several protected contexts: journalistic reporting, educational or pedagogical settings, and artistic or cultural contexts, which directly covers your documentary or theater example.
Provided the exposure is strictly necessary for the work itself, I imagine.
Exactly, and not just an excuse to parade the symbol around. It also protects judicial contexts, like a prosecutor displaying the jacket as evidence to a jury, and a broader catch-all for anything clearly relevant to the public interest.
So the law attempts to draw a clean line between someone wearing the jacket to project power and intimidate a restaurant versus someone displaying it to educate an audience or tell a narrative story. But I still say the friction is enormous. A cop pulling over a van full of people wearing these jackets who claim, oh, we're just on our way to a theater rehearsal. How does law enforcement adjudicate good faith on the side of the highway?
Yeah, that's tough.
This is going to generate some intense legal challenges down the road.
It undoubtedly will be tested in court repeatedly. I mean, the boundary between artistic expression, public intimidation, and good faith is rarely a clean, bright line. It is almost always a gray area that requires judicial interpretation.
Yeah. And with this legal framework, the enforcement mechanics and all these exceptions now firmly established for the Hells Angels, the natural next step is to look at who else falls under this legal net. Because they might be the first group targeted in Quebec, but they certainly aren't going to be the last.
That is a vital detail to emphasize. The sources make it abundantly clear that while the Hells Angels are the first group placed on this public ban list, Maxime Tardif explicitly stated that other groups operating within Quebec will soon be subject to the exact same ban.
So this isn't just a bespoke Hells Angels Act. It's a highly scalable template.
Exactly. It's a bureaucratic piece of machinery that has now been powered on. And the text of the law provides a very detailed look at how this machinery actually operates behind the scenes. It's not just a lone minister making arbitrary decisions in a vacuum based on headlines. Under Section 8, the minister adds or removes entities based on the substantiated recommendation of a designated law enforcement division whose specific primary mandate relates to criminal information management.
So there is essentially an intelligence unit within Quebec law enforcement actively building massive case files on different riding clubs, analyzing their visual identity to see if they meet those three criteria we talked about earlier.
Yes, exactly. They are continually gathering data to prove presence, criminal purpose, and the active exposure of symbols. And furthermore, Section 11 mandates that this list of entities is not static. It must undergo a rigorous annual review. Every single year, that designated law enforcement division has to reevaluate the intelligence and verify if each group on the list still meets the threshold for a criminal purpose.
Wait, does that mean a group could theoretically get their branding off the prohibited list?
Yes, the law deliberately provides an off-ramp. If an entity genuinely believes they have reformed and no longer meet the criminal criteria, they can formally apply in writing to the minister to be removed from the list.
Interesting.
They have to submit documentation indicating the reasons why they should be taken off, and the intelligence division has to examine those reasons and verify the current on-the-ground conditions. But this raises an important question about the ongoing game of cat and mouse that is about to unfold in Quebec.
Yeah.
Because there are countless motorcycle clubs operating right now. Some are genuinely just weekend riding enthusiasts, completely law-abiding citizens, doctors, mechanics who like to wear leather, put a patch on their back and ride in a pack. But they often adopt an aesthetic that heavily borrows from the outlaw culture. So how will law enforcement constantly evaluate which clubs are just weekend enthusiasts playing dress-up and which ones have actually crossed that threshold into a criminal purpose that legally warrants banning their visual identity?
It requires a massive, sustained intelligence-gathering effort. The police aren't just looking at the patches anymore. They have to constantly monitor the underlying activities, the finances, and the associations of the people wearing them to justify keeping the ban in place year after year.
Exactly.
And it makes you wonder about the wider ripple effect across the country. If Quebec successfully implements this and the courts uphold it, will other provinces adopt this model?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question. If you are a lawmaker in Ontario or British Columbia dealing with gang violence, you are watching Quebec very closely right now.
Right, because what happens to a Hells Angels member from Ontario who wants to ride into Quebec for a summer run?
Well, based on this law, the moment they cross the provincial border, their jacket goes from being legal attire to contraband.
Wow.
Yeah, they would be subject to the exact same fines and confiscation. It essentially creates a hard border for that visual identity. And that kind of cross-jurisdictional friction is going to be fascinating to watch unfold.
Yeah, which brings us to the ultimate takeaway for our listener today. I mean, why should someone who doesn't ride a motorcycle, who has absolutely zero connection to this subculture, care about Bill 13? Ultimately, this deep dive is about the profound friction between public safety and civil liberties. Quebec is actively prioritizing what it calls the peaceful enjoyment of premises, the fundamental right of the public to go about their day, sit in a restaurant, or walk through a festival without feeling psychologically threatened by visual intimidation.
Right. And to guarantee that peaceful enjoyment, they are willing to legally restrict the right to display certain symbols. It is a real-time, high-stakes sociological and legal experiment in Quebec to see if banning the visual identity of an organization can actually neutralize its operational power on the street.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because whenever a government aggressively shuts down a criminal group's primary mode of public communication and intimidation, you have to wonder about the unintended consequences. Like, how do these organizations respond when you take away their most potent weapon?
That is the ultimate puzzle to chew on as we wrap up. Because if the traditional, highly visible symbols, like the historic Death Head patch and this Support 81 merchandise, if those lead to immediate heavy fines and the physical seizure of property on the street, these groups aren't just going to pack up and disappear. They will likely evolve.
Right, they're highly organized. They will adapt to survive the new environment.
Exactly. Will this law inadvertently force these organizations to abandon the very symbols that make them so easily identifiable to both the public and to law enforcement? Could we see a sudden shift where they adopt entirely covert, unrecognizable symbols?
Oh, that's a scary thought.
Right.